Hi, my name is Dr. Dana Wasserman, and welcome to Tough Talk with Dr. Dana. Today's tough topic is one I'm sure the majority of you, if not all of you, are familiar with, and that is depression. Yes, today we're going to talk about depression, but first, as always, a bit about our disclaimer. Please look below and read our important disclaimer about these videos. And also, I have one to personally read to you. I'm legally required to tell you that I'm not providing psychological services and that this isn't intended to treat, diagnose, or cure any psychological issues you may have. I will be sure to honor your questions so that if necessary, you will know better when to seek help. Important stuff there. So, depression. I know you've heard of it. It is one of the most commonly diagnosed mental illnesses, which as of 2017, over 300 million people have been living with depression. And there might be question as to why did I decide to do an episode on depression after a week of anxiety? Well, that's because depression and anxiety are commonly comorbid. Wait a minute, I know. Dr. Dana, what does comorbid mean? Well, it simply means diagnosed together. So according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, they have found that approximately 60% of people who have been diagnosed with depression are also diagnosed with anxiety. And the converse seems to hold true too, that about 60% of people who have been diagnosed with anxiety are also diagnosed with depression. Now, of course, naturally, the question is begged, well, why? Why is that? Well, the actual answer to that is outside the scope of this episode, but I can tell you that there are some overlapping symptoms between depression and anxiety, which you'll see, and there also may be some similar biological components. And I'll leave it at that right there. If there is anyone who is interested in more information about this, please put this in the comments and I'll be happy to direct you in the right direction. So in this episode, here's what I want to do. I want to define depression. I want to differentiate depression from just having the blues or feeling down in the dumps. Then I want to talk about depression as it is manifest during COVID-19. And if one feels depressed during this time of COVID-19, how can we best manage it? How can we best cope with it? We can do this all in 15 minutes. So let's go. What is depression? Let's answer that. Depression is actually a name for a number of mental illnesses that comprise a spectrum of depressive disorders. And these depressive disorders exist as feeling sad and empty, there's the emotional realm, or also irritable. If you're a child or adolescent, it can manifest as irritability that involve our physical self and how we feel physically, and our cognitive self, the thoughts that we have. And that all of these ultimately impact how we function over a particular span of time. And typically the most common of these depressive disorders is one that is called major depressive disorder. And by the way, for all the depressive disorders out there, they're primarily differentiated by duration and timing, how long it lasts, what are the episodes, and also the presumed etiology. Etiology simply means the cause or the presumed cause. So let's talk about differentiation in more detail here. Everyone can feel sad and down and in the dumps. This is a supremely human, normal experience. We may have the emotion of deep sadness. These thoughts might be primarily negative, and physically, we may feel physically dragged down, just sitting on the couch, eating Oreos, and watching some really bad or really good TV. Sometimes feeling down can last for days. You might find yourself crying a lot. You might find yourself now eating very little. You might find yourself sleeping very little. These symptoms may be, in fact, responses to a situation, what we might call in more lay terms situational depression. Or if, God forbid, you suffer a terrible loss, there is good reason to feel incredibly sad, and you will likely feel grief. Now, people might commonly ask, and they do, is there a difference between grief and depression? And the answer is yes. But again, this is kind of outside the scope of this episode. However, I can tell you that grief tends to happen in waves of depressive feelings. Whereas with actual depression, it's sort of a flat, overarching, terrible feeling. But if anybody's interested in that differentiation between grief and depression, I'll be happy to answer you in the comments below. So, but the question remains, at what point does feeling sad constitute depression? I'm going to tell you. So this is important here. So if weeks go by, not necessarily days, if weeks go by and you find that your basic functioning has changed and that you may have felt the following. You might have a depressed, empty, sad mood. You might lack interest in things that you used to love to do. The inability to feel joy is called anhedonia. And if you, let's say you love mountain biking, you're all about mountain biking. Well, you start to feel pretty terrible and you're feeling depressed and sad, and you start to now feel as though mountain biking means absolutely nothing to you. That might be a symptom. You might have weight loss or weight gain unintended. You might have too much sleep, hypersomnia, or you might not have enough sleep, insomnia. You might have that kind of agitated restlessness that I discussed and having anxiety, or you might feel intense fatigue, which again is another symptom of anxiety as well. Now, you may have feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness even. Your concentration may be impaired. It's really hard to concentrate on tasks on hand when you are feeling terrible emotionally, physically, and cognitively. And perhaps of most concern is when you start to have thoughts about leaving this mortal coil, that you have thoughts about perhaps harming yourself. This is when you have to reach out for help. And I tell you this now, if you have any of those type of thoughts, you got to reach out for help because you're worth that. So if you start to feel any combination of those symptoms, it's worth calling your GP. It's worth calling somebody and say, hey, I'm not feeling right here. And especially if these symptoms interfere with your daily functioning, that is, if they interfere with your occupational functioning, it's hard to work, your social functioning, your relationships go down the tubes, then it's definitely time to seek out some kind of assistance. So I can tell you a little bit about depression because as one with bipolar 2 disorder, again, my disorder happens in phases. I have the hypomanic, elevated, expansive phase where I'm really wound up, but then I invariably crash into a depressive episode. And interestingly enough, of the times I've been hospitalized, not been the hypomanic episodes. No, not at all. In fact, of the 4 times I have been hospitalized, it's been because of the depressive episodes, because I stopped feeling safe with myself and I knew that it was time to reach out and seek help. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with reaching out and seeking help. It's the best thing I ever did. Some of my symptoms were I could not get out of bed. I just could sleep all day if I wanted to. And when I did get out of bed, it felt like there was a box of rocks on my shoulders. It was extremely uncomfortable. I couldn't stop eating. I could never feel full. And of course, I craved really terrible food like the aforesaid Oreos sitting on the couch. My thoughts were very, very negative and hopeless. And I felt as though no matter what I did in my life, I was somehow an abject failure. Even though I knew deep down that intellectually this was not true, those intrusive thoughts, that is, thoughts that came to intrude upon me, tried to convince me that this was so. And emotionally, I was just sad and sad all the time. So depression is no joke. I felt it in every realm of my being. And luckily, I think because of my training, I knew when to reach out. And hopefully through this episode, you'll be better equipped to know when you reach out. So let's get to COVID-19 already, huh? So how do these symptoms fit in with COVID-19? Let's think about that. Well, as the isolation continues, and remember, I gave a talk about isolation and some of its negative impacts on us, many people have lost jobs and therefore they have lost a regular schedule. Because of this isolation, there's just a general loss of stimulation out there and being out there in the world because of physical distancing and therefore a loss of routine. And routine is so important. And this could very well lead to feeling really glum, especially if you've lost a job. Naturally, you're going to feel glum. That's understandable. Sitting on your couch, eating Oreos, watching Netflix, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But to what extent? And how are you feeling about that? So people can get really depressed during this time. But luckily, there are some means for which people can do besides reaching out for help to help kind of get themselves back up on their feet and start to feel functioning again. Let's go over them, okay? So first things first, get up and go to bed the same time each day. Reset your biological clock. If you have hypersomnia, you got to set that alarm clock and try to just drag yourself out of bed. And if you have insomnia, there are many different ways, which I can list down below, to help you sleep. Actually, two of the best ways to help sleep, I believe, are really good exercise and yoga. And luckily, we have two people at Stigma-Free Society who are offering videos. We have Lindsay on Mondays at 10 a.m. to kick some butt with some really excellent sweat-bearing exercise. And then we have Fantasia with some gorgeous yoga at Fridays on 2 o'clock. These can really help promote good, healthy sleep. Keep up with personal hygiene. Now, this is a kicker. As a psychologist, one of the markers that I see in people if they might have depression is I ask them, how often do you shower? It may not be quote unquote an official symptom, but I find that when people lose their ability to keep up their basic hygiene, they must be pretty depressed, don't you think? And so I think it's important that no matter what, even if you're stuck inside, each day that you get up and you shower and you look nice because you feel good about taking care of yourself. Eat healthy meals at regular times. That means cut back on the Oreos. Good nutrition is a big part of the battle here. If you don't have good nutrition, you're going to feel physically terrible, and then this is going to therefore impact your emotional well-being and your cognitive well-being, just because you're going to feel slow and draggy and kind of miserable. Like I said before, exercise regularly. I cannot underestimate the importance about that, because you get your endorphins going, you get your serotonin going, you feel good, you break a sweat, and it's just very, very healthy for you. Allocate time for working and time for resting. If you're depressed and you're still working, it's important that you try to schedule out your time for working when you're at your most energetic, when you're at your least depressed. And sometimes, or actually I would say most of the time, for people, they have certain periods during the day where they feel better than others. So try to schedule out work when you're feeling really good. And that rest time is for the times when you're not feeling so good. So you can take extra care of yourself, whether it's take a hot bath or light some incense or do some gentle yoga. Do something to take care of yourself and have some compassion. Again, I can't underestimate that. And perhaps most importantly, in some ways, is make time for hobbies you enjoy. Again, one of the primary symptoms of depression is sort of losing interest in the things that you used to enjoy. Well, if you kind of jumpstart this and get yourself to do something you enjoy, even if it's inside, if you're a mountain biker and you can do so safely out there, by all means, do it. Kick yourself a little bit and do it. I guarantee that you're going to just possibly feel better about this. But there are many other hobbies that you can come up with, that you can do with other people through Zoom. I know of knitting groups through Zoom, anything like that, to be creative and have a creative outlet. And it doesn't just have to be a hobby like that. It could be drawing, painting, music, um, dancing even. Any way you can to express yourself is incredibly healthy when one is depressed. I can't underestimate connecting through Zoom and Skype, staying socially connected with friends. Just because we're physically distanced does not mean we have to be socially distanced. And one of the markers, I think, of depression is isolating yourself and cutting yourself off of people whom you care about and people who care about you. If you stay connected, you stay related, and it kind of keeps you out of that mindset that can suck you in, particularly if it's negative. And lastly, helping people in need. Like I said last week, there's nothing like helping people in need, because when we have a negative mindset, or we have negative intrusive thoughts going through our head, they become almost cyclical, and it can be very hard to extract ourselves from those thoughts when we really have nothing else going on. So when you're actually out there helping somebody else, you are giving of yourself to somebody else. You are making yourself and making somebody else feel really good. And that's got to be an endorphin rush, just to know that some maybe small gesture that you have made somebody else and made somebody else's day feel fantastic. So, all right, I guess that would be about it. I'm going to look for some questions now. I'm happy to answer. This has been great. Thank you so much. Let's take a look. Let's see. Ooh, this is a great question. Here we go. How do you grieve relationships lost with people who are still alive? I think you grieve the relationship as if that person simply weren't there anymore, that you go through a process of grieving. And it's not dissimilar, I don't think, to some of the stages that we talked about last week, um, which which is, of course, I'm trying to think of right now. Of course, but it's really important to see that I don't think there's much of a difference um, in terms of grieving someone who's alive and then grieving someone who is not of this mortal coil anymore. It will come in waves. You will feel moments of wellness and happiness, and then you'll feel intense moments of sadness. And you need to allow yourself I don't want to call it a gift, but sort of the opportunity to feel these things. Because if you don't allow yourself to feel this sadness of this loss of a relationship, then you'll never really begin to move through it. And I never ever use the term, and I've said this before, get over it. I don't buy that. I don't believe anybody gets over a kind of grief, whether or not the person is alive or not. We simply move through it, and it becomes different, and it changes over time. Let's see. Okay. Showering can be really tough to do when in a deep depression. Absolutely, absolutely. And I completely relate to that. In some of my darkest moments, the thought of showering was incredibly, incredibly overwhelming to me, and embarrassing as it is. I'm happy to talk about that. One of the ways that helped was just sort of putting my feet in the bathtub and just letting some water run over it, and knowing that it wasn't going to completely overwhelm me. So it took me a series of steps to get in there. I don't know if that will work for everybody else, but that is what worked for me. It was just a stepwise thing. I might just put my feet in the bath or something like this. And then I would go up to my legs and then go up to my knees. And that's about as close as I got until I was able to fully submerge myself in the water, which was, when it did happen, absolutely wonderful and exhilarating. But the pains it took to get there were quite a lot. Here we go. How do you deal with the worry that when you are feeling well or happy, that you may at any time fall into a time of depression? I think it's about living in the present as best we can. I will say I do find myself wondering, will I have another hypomanic episode? And will this lead into a crash? And will this one be even more serious than the last? I try to remind myself, and I've also told my clients this too, that if you find yourself falling into this sort of future tripping, as it were, that you can just remind yourself to just kind of guide yourself back gently and remember that this is the present and you are feeling good now, because we really can't prepare for another episode except for just treating ourselves as well and as beautifully as possible and with as much compassion as possible. But I certainly understand the concern. It's just a matter of a gentle guide back to center, to present. Let me see. I have experienced many depressions too. For me, I was not sad, but more numb, no emotions. It is not always sad, worry, and tears, right? Absolutely right. Right. A depressed mood doesn't have to mean crying and tearing up. There's a kind of numbness. I don't want to go so far as call it a kind of apathy per se, because it's not that you don't care, you just don't feel anything. There's like a lack of affect there that is absolutely depressive. So yes, we don't have to be foreclosed to tears and sadness when it comes to this. Let's see. What tips do you suggest when you feel triggered? Aha. I deal with PTSD, so COVID has made me more sensitive to triggers. Can you suggest any tips? Any tips? Any trips? Okay, can you suggest any tips when I deal with PTSD? I think knowing what your triggers are probably sort of the greatest weapon that you have, and to make sure that you have a kind of a battle plan, a kind of plan that you have when you are in fact triggered, so they don't come at you as such a surprise. It doesn't list here what in fact the triggers are, and that's fine. But I would say keeping track of what those triggers are, being sensitive to them, having some compassion about them, and to really have a sense of, here's what I can do when I'm triggered by something like COVID-19, whether it's the news, whether it's me just talking about this might be triggering. And then to sort of leave whatever situation you may be in, if possible, and to do what you need to do, whether it's deep breathing or some kind of meditation or whatever it is you need to do to sort of calm your physiology down. Okay. And I think those would be the best ways to deal with triggers with COVID-19. How do you cope with depression when you work from home and you don't have a good excuse to get out of the house? Whew, that's a really good one, because so many of us are stuck in the house. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about depression today, is because, this kind of isolation is part and parcel, I think, to being depressed and being stuck in the house. I think the best way to cope, again, is to recognize what it is about being stuck in the house that is making you depressed, if in fact that's the case, number one. Number two, stay connected to people through social media as best you can. I don't care how you do it, whether it's Zoom or Skype or telephone, the ways to stay connected to the outside world, so we sort of diminish the impact of the physical distancing that we have. And it also depends on some of the other symptoms of depression that you have. If you find that cognitively you have a lot of negative self-talk, I always suggest to people that you write down the negative self-talk and then you answer it back with positive self-talk. We have these things called automatic thoughts, and automatic thoughts are sort of the sort of semi-conscious thoughts that flow throughout our mind when we don't really realize it. And those can be very, very negative. And it's important that we start to pay attention to what those thoughts might be so they don't intrude so much upon us that we become depressed. So I think that just being vigilant about taking care of yourself and exercising and maintaining hygiene and communicating with people is probably the best way to cope with depression when we're stuck inside. Let's see. How can our partners support us when we are depressed? Well, I can say this. I can say this on a personal level, I think, and I think it'll be okay. For me, I just wanted someone not to criticize me. I wanted someone to simply understand me. And when I asked for help, to get the help that I needed. To just have someone understand that this is a condition. This is a condition that I am working through, that I'm gaining help through, and that here are the things that you have to educate them to a little bit. Here are the things that you can do to help me. So I have a husband who has been ridiculously supportive throughout all of this. And I couldn't be with anybody better because he knew to listen to me when I was crying for the 30th time during the day. And he held me for as many times as I asked, and it was seemingly endless. So let them know, let your partners know what you need, and then have a discussion about it with them. What can your partner do for you in terms of your partner's capability? And what can you expect from your partner that's realistic too? Like, I couldn't expect my partner, my husband, to lie in bed with me all day and snuggle. Now, I might have liked that, but that wasn't possible. But we were able to sort of work out a system of support that was really, really helpful. Okay. What do you recommend for a friend or a family member of someone with depression to do to help encourage them to get up and maintain their routine? That's always tough because not everybody feels like he or she is ready to emerge from a depression. I do think that just calling them and being supportive and either Zooming with them and just gently reminding them to get up and how important it is for their health and their well-being. And you might hear, I just can't do that. I just can't do this. Actually, they can, but because of depression, they can't. And I just think gentle encouragement is the best way to go. And if you feel like they're at the point where they really need some help, you can always ask to join them in a call for some more extensive help if necessary. How do we remember to use these coping mechanisms like exercise and eating healthy when we feel no energy or ability to control these things? Well, that's a really good question because I've struggled with that too. And sometimes, at least, in my time of struggling with bipolar 2, I have lost the battle and I just hadn't done anything for months and put on a bunch of weight and I just felt physically miserable. It wasn't the weight that was so important. It was the fact that I was so depressed that I just kept eating and I put on weight. So how do we remember? I would say to write this out. Get yourself a little journal or a little book and write down, even if it's just the littlest thing. Even if you just walk around your home a couple of times, it's some kind of physical activity, and that's where you can start. And then the next day you can check off physical activity. I walked around my home 3 times. And the next day I walked around my home 4 times. Eating healthy can be miserable if you're feeling depressed. I found that when I was in a depressive episode, as part of my bipolar 2, I felt like I just wanted sweets. Isn't that fascinating? I just wanted just sugar, just give me some sugar. And but I also had to think through the consequences of if I eat this, I will feel even worse. So maybe keeping track of what you eat each day and just remind yourself to have some compassion if you do eat a bunch of Oreos. Don't beat yourself up. You're working through something. But maybe mark down, but hey, you know what? I had a salad tonight. I had 2 bites of a salad tonight, at least that. Let me see. All right. I think we have just a few more left. Okay. My daughters are separated physically. One is in the US. I have the younger one. How do I help them stay close? Um, that's challenging. I'm not going to lie. That's a really challenging one. I would say if you can connect them up through Zoom or Skype or one of them and have them on a regular call each day or every other day, just to keep them connected, have them write each other emails or send each other things through snail mail. I think that would be the best way to keep them connected because boy, that sounds like a big challenge and I feel for you. Let's see. Ooh, we have so many more questions here. This is so great. All right, we'll do a couple more here. What about depression in teens? How do you think it may differ or any tips tailored to this age? I think that this is an episode unto itself, and I think you just gave me an idea for another episode about depression in children, in teens. I know that primarily that the mood can manifest as irritability, first as feeling depressed or sad. I'm not sure how I would necessarily make these tips any differently, except that I would say that in terms of approaching them, if they aren't talking about it, may take a different tack and a more probably delicate approach. A more delicate approach in terms of how to talk to teens. But I'm going to hold that question because I think I just have another episode, okay? Thanks. Okay, couple more. Is it healthy to hold boundaries, even if it means intentionally not interacting with loved ones to stay focused on a healthy mindset? Here's an answer. Are you ready? Yes. Absolutely. You know, boundaries are everything. And if there are people in our lives who are seemingly toxic or not good for us, even if they are blood, even if they're our family, if they are promoting a kind of boundaryless toxicity, as it were, you have every right to step away and just say, no, we're done here. All right, let's see. Let me see any more. All right. Right. Well, I think we are done here. Well, thank you so much for these fantastic questions, and I've really enjoyed this episode. Depression in teens is certainly an episode will be coming up soon. Thank you. You know who you are, and I hope you are all well and take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.